Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to that word chat. I'm a little bit, I usually start the show a little bit confused. Let me center my camera there. Today is no exception because I lost Wi-Fi at 5 to 4, 35 minutes ago. And we only got it back literally 2 minutes before the show started. I did a Wi-Fi hotspot with my phone. So if I disappear, talk amongst yourselves, that's fine. Um, it'll be a good show. Either way, we have Carolyn Richmond today from We Need Diverse Books and Alaina Lavoie from We Need Diverse Books. Lavoie is communication manager. Richmond, I should use first names. Alaina is the communications manager, and Carolyn is the program director, and she's been there since the beginning. Carolyn writes young adult fiction, young adult literature. I said fiction. I think it's fiction. We'll ask her. We'll ask her all these things. And Alaina is a teacher, teaches publishing and writing at Emerson College. So we'll find out how that's going. I don't know. I'm always curious what the colleges are doing, whether there's in-person learning or how that's working out these days. So let me first question. One I didn't necessarily, I'll put you on the spot a little bit here. The name is very direct. We Need Diverse Books. Seems obvious to me, almost like naming it that word chat. We need diverse books. It's something that decades ago, I was sort of aware people were saying we need diverse books. We need more diversity in books. We need literature that reflects the readers. So, I mean that's decades ago. So, what happened? Why have we not figured this out yet?
I think we're figuring it out. I do have to say I've been really heartened by how the publishing industry, specifically the children's side, has really responded to the call for We Need Diverse Books. So WNDB started in 2014 as a hashtag on Twitter, and that was the hashtag We Need Diverse Books, and it just took off. We started trending. I think it took everyone by surprise by how responsive people were from all over the world, and we've since grown into a 501c3 nonprofit. And in those 6 years since we began, I've seen, a lot of strides that have been made. So I've been really encouraged by it. But I think what's hard is just, we're working within an industry that has a lot of systemic bias and racism, and it's something that is going to take a long time to overcome. But overall, I mean, you walk into a bookstore today, or you just check out offerings at your local library, it's really neat to see that there are a lot more diverse writers getting published.
Okay, so 6 years ago, what was there something in particular that started this, that prompted this?
Yeah, so BookCon came out with their roster of authors, featured authors, and so I actually wasn't directly involved at the very beginning. I just had my daughter in 2014, and that's when things got started. So what happened was, so BookCon released their roster of authors, and it was I think it was like all white and grumpy cat. Is that the name of the cat that had the grumpy face?
Yeah.
So there was
Call it
kind
what
of
you want.
this upswell on social media, like at a huge conference like this, we really need to see more representation. So after all of, the hashtag started trending, there was the inaugural We Need Diverse Books panel at BookCon. And that just kind of kicked things off. I think, like you said, the call for diverse books is decades, centuries old, but there's something about social media that just connected people in ways that that just wasn't there before. I mean, people all over the world were able to kind of plug into this and say, like, we all we need more diverse books.
Interesting. So, and Alaina, you also came a little bit later. You're communication director. What was your involvement? How did you get started with We Need Diverse Books?
That's a great question. I actually started as a volunteer, which I believe Caroline also started as a volunteer. I was asked to create Twitter at some point during my undergrad years in college. Thankful to that professor for making me do that. She said it would open up opportunities professionally. And I was on Twitter and I decided to spend a week tweeting at places that I considered like my dream employers, places that
Oh,
I would love to work someday. You know, the kinds of organizations and brands that had a mission that felt really near and dear to my heart. And I tweeted at WNDB, which at the time I believe was an all volunteer, super small grassroots existence. And they let me know how I could get involved with volunteering. And I started doing that. And everything that Caroline said about social media, that's exactly what I was doing. I was connecting people on social media, hosting our Twitter chats at the time, you know, retweeting authors, signal boosting their work, getting the word out about different events, much like this one, virtual, in person. And that was really, you know, I started doing that in 2015, and then I became communications manager about a year ago, a little over a year ago. And up until that point, I was mostly on the social media and programming teams and just absolutely love doing what WNDB does. I think we have a great, passionate team of staff and volunteers and supporters.
yeah, that's really great. It's a very interesting story. So I just use Twitter to, I don't know, to get noticed, I guess. But I never thought about actually just tweeting to people and saying, "Hey, I like your organization. What can I do for you?" That's kind of a neat origin story for your involvement. Is that a bookshelves that you're wearing for us today? Is it?
Yes.
Can we see? Show us a little bit of that. Oh, that's wonderful.
One of
That's
about
true.
4 or 5 book dresses that I would
Oh
normally
yeah,
wear to the ALA conference and to the Walter
right.
Awards, and sadly this year they're getting underutilized.
Oh, yes, exactly. Well, I'm glad we gave you an opportunity. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I have to, we had to really appreciate that. So you're teaching. What do you teach at Emerson?
I just finished up teaching a summer course in their MFA program that was
Mhm.
personal marketing for authors. So
Ah, there you go.
that was actually targeted at folks who are getting an MFA who want to become published authors, primarily in genre fiction, young adult, middle grade, children's, horror, sci-fi, fantasy. And it was focused on how to help them market their own work.
Mhm.
But I also hope to teach in the future more on their publishing side as well, to people who are trying to get an education so they can join the industry. And basically the kind
Right,
of things that we're doing at WNDB on that side, I hope to help those people with.
right, right. So the things you do at WNBD, and there are 12 initiatives. It's a broad range of things, and I don't want to put you on the spot and say list from me all 12. But what can we get from both of you a little bit an idea of what We Need Diverse Books does beyond sort of, I suppose the obvious is simply promote authors from marginalized communities, authors of color, people who we don't necessarily see, and books related to those topics. But what are these? What are all the initiatives of We Need Diverse Books?
I kind of frame it as we have a three-pronged approach. We have three audiences that we serve. The first you mentioned, diverse writers and illustrators. And then we
Mhm.
also support diverse publishing professionals, especially through our internship program, which provides living stipends for diverse interns, just because, you know, the industry itself, it's so reliant on getting your foot in the door with an internship to start. But because so many houses and literary agencies are located in New York City or Boston or San Francisco, the cost of just moving there for the summer is so high that a lot of diverse candidates just can't take these on. And so the industry has remained pretty white and cis and abled. And so this is just our way of helping more diverse candidates get into the industry and scale up the ladder. So
Mhm.
far, we've given 54 grants over the past 6 years. And of the 39 grantees who graduated from college, 30 are now employed in the industry, and 2 are making their own acquisitions, which is really neat to see.
That's impressive, yes.
Yeah, we're really proud and just super excited for all of them. We're just finishing up our 2020 cycle, which was our first year all virtual due to COVID.
Yeah.
And then we also serve students, diverse, well, just any students really, through our WNDB and the classroom program in particular. That provides free diverse books to low income schools nationwide. So far, we've given over 19,000 books over all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And we're starting up our next giveaway cycle come the fall, now that schools are reopening or at home, depending on your district. But that's kind of the different groups that we work for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And but that's um, so how many initiatives is that? We said 12, right?
Yeah, so 12, and they
Are there
all
some
kind of,
others?
yeah, do different purposes. For instance, one of our most recent one is the emergency grants. Due to COVID, a lot of
Oh,
diverse creatives have lost income. So these grants just provide, kind of a stipend for people to, pay bills, pay for babysitters, whatever they might need, kind of just, help them through these tough times. But we also have grants for unpublished writers and illustrators. Every year we have our Walter Dean Myers Awards, which celebrates and honors excellence in diverse books. We always have the award ceremony at the Library of Congress, but of course this past March we had to cancel due to COVID. It was just when everything was changing. But in years past, it's been at the Library of Congress, and we do plan on doing it again next year. We're just not quite sure if we'll be able to meet in person or not. But yeah, that's kind of a brief rundown of different initiatives we have.
okay. And I should probably clarify the your focus is on books for young people.
Yes,
Is that correct?
we're gradually moving into the adult realm. For instance, I mentioned the internship grants. They've been for children's interns, like interns on the children's side, but starting next summer, we will be expanding that to interns on the adult side due to a very generous donation from the author Celeste Ng. And so we're excited about that to kind of grow and
Yeah.
expand that initiative.
Oh, terrific. So there's I had a question before the show about, and we're going to talk about words because I'm a copy editor. A lot of the people who tune in are word people. Well, we're all word people, I think, but we're people who deal with the specifics of which word makes sense in this situation. So, is that a conscious decision to say? Is there a conscious decision to say young people as opposed to kids or youth, or and I guess how do we define the genres and who we're talking about when we use those terms?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I have never really thought about the differences. I know as far as WNDB is concerned, we started with a focus on children's and YA literature, both fiction and nonfiction. So
Uh,
from board books all the way up to young adults, so 0 to 18 for the most part. And that still pretty much is our focus. And it does get tricky, yeah. I guess we usually just say like kids and young adults to hopefully include that age range. Alaina,
okay.
did you have any insights?
Yeah, usually I have to explain this a little bit when folks are trying to figure out whether their books are a fit for the blog or which authors we cover. And
Mhm.
I usually say children's literature all the way from picture books for the youngest readers through young adult and possibly new adults that's aimed at YA. So anything that could be for that young reader audience.
Mhm. So it's a broad range then. I had we had a question from Trisha Bennett in chat, and maybe now is a good time. Trisha, if you want to unmute, Trisha's an old neighbor of mine, so it's nice to see her in the chat here. Why don't you unmute and ask?
You just mentioned that you had a really generous grant from Celeste, and I'm wondering how else you raise money other than, I mean, do people just make donations, or do you have like a development department that takes care of that for you?
We've been really lucky. We have a lot of small donors, people who are just, wanting to give whatever they can. We've also gotten donations from publishing houses and literary agencies. And we also have several family foundation grants that have helped us, build up certain initiatives. But for the most part, we've really been grassroots, and we've been incredibly lucky to have such a strong response from the writing and publishing communities. We're still, I think we're still very grassroots in the sense that we have a small part-time staff. We're hoping to, scale up and start having full-time positions very soon. But so we don't have like a development branch per se right now. We're all kind of wearing different hats.
Okay.
And I like your shirt.
So, so what we've been talking a lot in this show. And we started with the pandemic in March, I guess, and soon after the pandemic, we had the summer of George Floyd and protests all over the country. And I think and my perspective has been a greater awareness of issues of diversity, and we've talked about the words we use, and do we capitalize black and white, and some of those questions. So, and I wonder, is this has this presented? Is there a greater awareness? Am I optimistically seeing that, or is there a greater awareness and a greater focus on this very issue that you're focused on right now?
I definitely think so. I mean, right after the George Floyd protests happened, we've been receiving a lot of queries from people, um, both in and out of the industry, who just want to connect and figure out ways that they can help. We're actually right now in the planning stages of something called the Black Creatives Fund. Um, it's going to start with initial donation from Penguin Random House, but with the idea that anyone can donate to it. And we really just want to help bolster, locate new Black talent, but also support, mid-list Black authors. That's what we're hearing from the Black professionals that we're talking to, that just across the board, Black writers and illustrators they need more support, both in-house and from readers and librarians from, all different angles. So we're trying to build up a program that specifically serves Black writers. And yeah, I definitely think since the protests happened, there's been an upswell in interest about what we do. And just in general, I've seen over my own personal social media, people talking about racism that have never brought it up before. So I am encouraged by that. I know we have a huge way to go, but I feel like people are finally talking about things that for many, many years, you just overlook, or, it's too awkward to address.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that the awareness in the publishers. So has that? I mean, part of the part of my when I expressed surprise that we'd still be talking about the need for diverse books when it's such an old issue, is that, I mean, part of the reason I'm not surprised is that publishers tend to be stuck in their ways. So has that been? You mentioned you've had good response from publishers. Is it greater now than it has been, or have they been saying all along, yeah, we know we're trying to do something about this, and just not, for some reason, not figuring it out?
I think it differs from house to house, but also usually what I find is that there are certain people within a house that are really on board, and they want to make changes, and they are ready to go, and they have ideas, and they want to, really diversify their lists and boost those books. But, publishing is also a business, and businesses and corporations, it takes a long time to integrate these changes. And sometimes other people at the house are a lot more reluctant because certain things have worked for them in the past. And so I see a lot of tug of war inside, houses about that. Sometimes an editor might want to acquire a book, but they just don't get the buy-in from marketing or, PR,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So it's changing. There's a lot more awareness, but I also see a lot of burnout. One thing that I am concerned about is a lot of diverse publishing professionals, from editors to marketers to designers. There's a lot of burnout. Usually we can get them in the door, but like around that 5-6 year mark, there's just a lot that they're dealing with behind the scenes. New York City is so hard to afford to live in on a publisher's salary, and a lot of times they end up going into a totally different field. And so that is something I'm trying to brainstorm of what we can do to kind of help out these mid-career folks.
Well, that was my next question. What can you do to help these people who are suffering the burnout?
Well, a lot is tied to the fact that I think a lot of people in publishing, they're either able to do it long term by having a partner who has that another income that can help bolster them, or they have family money, or otherwise it gets really tough to stay in the industry because it's so tied to New York City. I've seen a lot of people talk about if we just allow remote positions, that can really help change the industry. If people can just live wherever they can. And I mean, now we're kind of living that right now with the pandemic. A lot of houses have just been closed and they aren't coming back until, next year, next January. But I don't know, that's tough to move from like everyone has to be in New York City to people can live wherever they want in the world. So
right. That's a really interesting, I guess, example of the systemic racism problem, is that the publishing houses may want to bring in other voices and people of color and people of different communities, but if you're not sort of part of that tradition and you don't have the money, then it's hard to stick with it. So there's this, it's not maybe intentional on the part of the publishers, but it takes some different thinking perhaps to figure out a way to keep those diverse voices in the publishing house.
Yeah,
so
very much so.
So when we're looking at diversity, what there's I think we've been very aware of Black authors and the need for Black characters in books, but diversity is very diverse, it's broad. So what are some of the are there areas of diversity that we don't think about diversity that you're making an effort to promote, like disabilities and people who don't have obvious features that we recognize them as being part of a diverse community?
Alaina, I've talked a lot, so I don't want to.
I personally love the definition of diversity that WNDB has on our website, which lists a variety of different marginalized communities that someone might be a part of. So people of color, including Black, Native, and Indigenous folks, LGBTQIA folks, people with disabilities, marginalized religions, cultural and religious minorities. And essentially what I really like about our definition is that we leave it open to the person's personal identity. So, especially with our definitions of LGBTQ and cultural minorities and disability, it's really up to a person to decide whether they identify with that label or not, and whether they want to apply for our programs with that in mind. So I've always really loved that our definition is so inclusive, and I think that we do a good job of supporting authors who fit more than one category as well. That's something that I look for on the communication side, is how can we promote people who are at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities. So authors who are both Black and trans, or who are both Native and queer, or who are both Black and Muslim, and how can we find those voices that perhaps have felt the need to hide part of who they are or not show up as their true selves in the publishing industry or as creators.
Mm-hmm. Um, and I'm thinking, as I said, I'm a copy editor, and so I'm dealing with, um, I'm not producing what I'm editing. I'm dealing with the words and um, how to maybe trying to improve my ear for things that are maybe um, marginalize other people without it being obvious, or sort of there's some hidden biases that come out. And I think, we don't see it. Maybe we do. I don't think we see a lot of, I don't think people are writing books that use stereotypes in a vicious way without thinking about it. But there are subtle things. So um, do you have any advice for the copy editors like me who are want to read something and show some sensitivity to the way it's written?
I think I personally recommend for copy editors specifically, since it's, at that stage in the process as a copy editor, you're working with mostly manuscripts that have already gone through the content development process, and hopefully at that stage they don't need a lot of heavy lifting. They don't need to be completely restructured, and you're looking for more of the nuances and the details, is probably really just looking at things like the Radical Copy Editor and looking into resources such as that to try and keep yourself aware of some of the things that may not be traditional rules or traditional grammar, the types of things that are beyond just knowing how to structure a sentence properly, or the right way to spell a word, or the best way to clean up, a really long paragraph. Trying to read up on that and to ideally read perspectives of people who are from marginalized backgrounds, so for example, if you are looking up, should I capitalize the B in Black, read perspectives of people who are Black and read that perspective from people who have lived that. And if you're trying to decide, if you're writing about disabilities, should you use person with a disability or disabled person? There are resources created by, for example, schools of journalism that focus on disability, and you can look into that information from the source and try to figure out, how does this read to people who are in that community? How is it that people in these communities want to be described? And I think one piece of advice that I tend to always get and give as someone who also writes journalism on the side is, if I'm speaking about an individual, I always ask them how I identify. So a question that I always ask every person is, what is your name? What are your pronouns? And how do you self-identify? That way you can get specific with them and find out how they prefer to be referred. And if you're talking about a group, that's when you would need to do the outside research, because it might not be as easy as just asking a single person, but hopefully there will be resources that point toward what people prefer in general and what some of your options are.
Right. So, as a writer, when you what can writers do if they may be part of a community, they may be identified as part of several communities, which is great, but I think there's been controversy over writers trying to write outside their community and failing. But every community has a number of communities within it, and so it's very difficult to say that there's a Hispanic, Latino experience, or a Black experience, or a gay experience. It's so different. So what advice do you give to writers to sort of deal with the fact that they don't know they want to write characters who are different from themselves, perhaps. But how do they go about that without missing the mark?
For me, I would say read a lot of writers from that background, really steep yourself in, the books that are being written by authors from that community. I also think it just takes a lot of looking inward and thinking about your own systemic biases and what we can do to overcome them. Something that I think about quite a bit is I know a lot of writers really do want to write a world that reflects their neighborhoods and their communities that oftentimes are diverse. But I also think oftentimes our own social networks tend to be very homogenous. So I think that's one area to explore, just asking yourself, if you want to write a Black character and you're not Black, or if you want to write a Chinese character and you're not Chinese, how well can you do that if you don't have anyone close to you who comes from that background too? And just examine it and kind of let that sit with you, because, I feel like a lot of writers who do want to write outside of their experience, they mean very well, and they really just want to help heed that call of like, we need more diverse books. But we have a lot of work to do within our own selves before we can truly, I think, write from someone else's culture and point of view. So for me, something that I try to do is I try to populate my side characters as diversely as possible, but my main characters, I feel like I'll never have that experience to really know what it's like to be Black or Latinx. So, but that's something that every writer has to kind of figure out for themselves. And there are ways that writers can do it. I know sensitivity readers are a big thing nowadays, finding someone from that community who can read your work and kind of point out where things don't quite seem right or are off. So that is something that people have explored.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you about that next. Is that a common thing, and is it being done, and is it being done effectively, the use of sensitivity readers? And how does one get a job as a sensitivity reader anyway?
We get quite a few requests via WNDB from publishers now who are like, hey, we have a book coming out. The author, would really like to get a sensitivity reader. Do you know of someone? Right now, it's very word of mouth. You can also just find them in general, like writer groups. I know on Facebook sometimes I see, little posts pop up like, hey, I'm looking for a sensitivity reader from this community. I'm willing to pay this much and I need it by this turnaround. It feels like it's a relatively new thing, so there's not like a database or anything. But yeah, I would say if you're gonna find a sensitivity reader, I think it's better to do it earlier in the process, because it's harder if you've already written it all to really go back and make deeper changes to a character. So maybe just, fleshing out a few ideas and just having someone to talk ideas with, like, I'd like to write a character from this background and this is, what I foresee them doing, but does this feel right to you?
I think we have a couple of questions from the group, so maybe now is a good time to dip in.
Perfect. Our first one is actually from someone who doesn't have a microphone, so I will ask on their behalf. The question is, I am new to the industry and would like to learn more about the systemic racism. Does it show up differently in publishing than in other areas? And if so, how?
Such a deep question. I think I don't know whether it shows up differently in publishing than in other areas. I do think that every industry has its own quirks and every industry has its own barriers, and publishing has historically been an industry that's very veiled, and so the idea is that you have to know someone and most of the time people tend to fall into publishing jobs or just fall into becoming an author because they know somebody that can help them get there. And there's not a lot of public accessible information about the process, whether you're an author or you want to work in the industry. There's not a lot of information about how to query properly or how to find a literary agent and vet them appropriately and know whether they're good to work with. And if you want a job in the industry, there's not a lot of information about, well, how many internships do I have to do? Is it possible to get a paid internship? How hard is it going to be from, you know, someone who's living in the Midwest to try and move to New York City and do this? I don't know if Caroline has any other thoughts, but I definitely think that every industry has its nuances. So obviously those barriers that come up in publishing, I feel like just reflect all of the systemic bias and racism that we have, but they reflected in the ways that publishing has kind of created its own niche as an industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm thinking about acquisitions and just what I've read about and heard about over the years, how because publishing tends to be very white and cis enabled, sometimes the diverse books that have come out have been, you know, like the Black experience is about the Civil War and slavery, or, you know, the Asian experience is all about the immigrant journey. And so even though they can be fantastic books, like the book that changed my life is The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, because it was the first book that I really saw myself in a story, and it just blew my mind. And that book is so important. But I know from a lot of diverse writers, they're like, we're more than stories about immigration or pain or hurt. We also want to be in fantasies and science fiction and in genres that people don't usually view as diverse, because traditionally they've been pretty dominated by like white male characters. So that is one way I've seen it kind of filtered into the publishing industry in particular.
So let me switch gears just a little bit here. Well, maybe it's not switching gears. Your books are young adult alternative history.
Yeah.
Is that right? So that's fascinating. Is that a struggle? Is I don't know what your approach is, but you know, history is written by white men. So does it take a little effort to sort of tell the story differently, or is that a focus of what you try to do personally as an author?
That's a great question. I haven't quite ever thought of it in that way. I will say in my most recent book, which is a Cold War alternate history that's coming out next summer, I really did struggle with whether I should make my character white or maybe biracial. Because it's set in the 1960s, and that's such a racially charged period, I was like, the character who's a girl is already going to be dealing with a lot of sexism because she's competing at this like Olympic style event. And so, you know, being a girl is already, you know, a big focal point. But my editor was like, there's so few stories out there with, you know, Chinese American characters, and you're one of the authors who could actually bring this to the table. Maybe you should think about making her Chinese or half Chinese. And I have to admit, it really was a struggle. I mean, I also have a lot of insecurities about, you know, will boys read my books if you know, they have a Chinese or half Chinese girl in them? I kind of have to fight against that, even though those are the stories I would have loved as a kid. You still hear that in the back of your head, you know, like if you have a white boy, maybe the audience will be bigger. But yeah, in that specific book, I really did struggle of how do I craft a story that I see as more of an adventure, kind of like a thriller. But if your protagonist is white, I mean, half Chinese and a female, you also have to bring in the racism and sexism of the era. You can't just like write that away, even though it's an alternate history. It's still, you know, connected to our timeline and, you know, all the, you know, racism, sexism that exists. So it was quite a struggle for me. I'm definitely, you know, still learning.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting that the publisher brought that up and I suppose that's, I don't know. I mean, maybe we've reached the point where publishers are going to start thinking about, what are we missing out on here as a possibility, um, in telling this story.
Yeah. I mean, I love my editor, and she really did push me, you know, to make my work more diverse, which is funny if you think about it.
Right. Right. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That is a definite example of irony. I suppose that's good. And I also wanted to ask we talked about the big publishers, but um, what's the market for somebody, wanting to write and publish and get out there? What's the industry like in terms of the smaller presses and some presses that are maybe focused on highlighting the diversity in literature?
Alaina, have you worked with any, like Lee and Low for the blog?
Yeah, no, I actually have. I previously worked at a smaller publisher, and I've worked with a lot of them on the blog and communications initiatives that we need diverse books, and I covered them in my course as well. And I think that smaller publishers, one of the great things about those publishers is that, yeah, for the most part, they've been here and they've been doing the work. You know, like Caroline mentioned, Lee and Low specifically, there are publishers that from their very beginnings decided to be specifically for perhaps POC voices, LGBTQ voices, you know, disability voices, however new or old those publishers are. And that's one of the really wonderful things about those presses is, you know, they may be smaller, they may have a smaller staff, they may have smaller budgets, but they have a lot of passion. And for the most part, the people who work at those publishers are really invested in those books. They chose to work at that type of publisher intentionally, and that's something that really matters to them. And you know, I know that, you know, for example, in Boston, it's a fiction publisher, but we have Beacon Press, which has always been very much about supporting marginalized creators. And I think that a lot of those types of publishers just have always been there to support those authors. And some of the great books that I've seen, you know, like The Summer of Everything by Julian Winters, which I believe comes out in mid-September, is from a smaller press. And, you know, a lot of the times we hear about Big Five books because they have a bigger marketing budget, they have the money to send authors to BookCon and on, you know, cross-country tours and to blow up billboard ads and to have their whole publicity team talking to USA Today and other places to try and get the book out there. But we don't want to miss those smaller publishers who have been doing the work all along and in a lot of ways are leaders that we should look to for what we could be doing better as an industry.
Right. I wanted to ask you about something that we had in your bio that I didn't mention when I introduced you at the beginning, but you received a Book Builders of Boston scholarship for your dedication to amplifying marginalized voices, and this is in 2017. What was that? What is a Book Builders of Boston scholarship? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Book Builders of Boston is actually a local organization in the Boston area that really supports the book publishing industry in a variety of ways through different events and different workshops and through the scholarships that they give out, which I can't remember if you have to be enrolled in a college program at the time, if that's one of the criteria, because I was in graduate school when I received it, but they're a great local organization that just is really passionate about books in the Boston area and the New England area. They serve all of New England, and you know, usually they would host things like book awards for New England throughout the year, and usually they'd have in-person panels, which I've been on a few, and workshops. And They tend to support people who work in the book publishing industry. So like book builders, taken literally, could mean the people who are working in production, but also acquisitions, editorial, marketing. And they also have a strong support of authors and creators as well. And I think they're always growing, and one thing that I love about them is they have an amazing job board. So if you're someone who lives in the New England area and you're trying to find a publishing job, I'm always like, check out Book Builders of Boston's website, because they post jobs for our publishing houses all over New England. And some of these publishers you may not have heard of. It's a small publisher in New Hampshire, it's a small publisher in Watertown, and you might not have heard of it until you see their job board, and then you realize there are these opportunities out there that are open for you.
Okay, I think we have another question from the group, and if you have questions, now's a good time to ask us. We're actually getting a little bit low on time. So if you have a question, stick it in the chat, and Heather will grab you and have you ask it.
Yes, we have one from Cynthia. Cynthia, if you'd like to unmute and ask.
Yes. Hi. I started an initiative to highlight editors of color, copy editors specifically. And I'm wondering if you have any advice about engaging publishers for your partnerships, or even publishers outside of the book industry, and how you found what the need was for providing assistance to students and newbies to the profession.
You mean like for the internship grants, or?
Right, yeah.
Well, I know it was really the idea of Linda Sue Park, she's a Newbery winning author, and she, hopped on board in 2014, and she's just like, we have to diversify publishing from within, we're not going to get the books that handle diversity with respect and care until we have more diverse people at the acquisitions table, and in marketing and in design. It's, we have to just make publishing more diverse. In terms of funding for it, we've been able to fund it usually through small donors, or people like an agency will say like, hey, a bunch of us agents want to get together and we want to fund one internship grant for one person. It's just through social media we've been able to spread the word, and people kind of just hear about the program and they get interested and want to help. So I feel like I'm not really answering your question. Can you what have I missed?
Yeah, I wonder if there's any as far as when you're reaching out to students or for internships, do they give any feedback about what areas, like you said, just to sustain them, or you have this new initiative for the COVID environment? Do you hear from them as far as what they need?
Yeah, so I don't oversee our internship grant committee. I'm cat sitting, so I just have a cat join me. But what we do try, we have a Facebook group for alums, and we have our program manager who checks in on them just to see how things are going. What can we do to better support them? We have regular events. I mean, right now in COVID, they're all virtual, but we have, chat and choose over Zoom, where we introduce them to other people in the industry. We're also looking into providing more mentorships for them, just because so many, oftentimes diverse interns and new people into publishing, they just don't have those mentorship opportunities. And we want to be able to connect them with someone who just gets it, how hard, this industry can be sometimes. And we feel like mentorship is one of the ways that can really help people stay in the industry and, not one day just feel like, they just want to find another field to go into, because it can be so challenging.
So in the spirit of diversity, I have to admit, I'm not a cat person. And I probably lost 20% of at least 20% of the viewership right there, and I apologize. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to hold up your cat so everybody could see it and comment and chat and say aw and things like that.
This is the cat. I'm cat sitting. His name is Nori. He's very sweet. It's funny, I've come here before and he never sits on my lap. course, when I'm in front of an audience, here he comes. But
Well, people do like, we have heard, I have heard that pets like to watch the show and react to the show. So I think, I think we're pet friendly um, on this show. So, what I've been hearing, I've been hearing, I've been very aware, and maybe doing the show is maybe more aware of a lot of the initiatives out there. And Cynthia is doing has this great blog that everybody should check out. And we've had Karen Yin on the show, the Conscious Style Guide, and Editors of Color Database. Um, where it sounds we're sounding very optimistic. Um, is that are we? Is it a struggle, or are things sort of? Do we have momentum here?
Alaina, do you want to take a first crack at this?
I mean, I think the answer can be both simultaneously. I think that what Caroline mentioned earlier about burnout, it's just important to sustain momentum. And something that I hear from a lot of diverse and marginalized creators is that they get a lot of publicity and support when there's a particular reason for that support. So, we talked earlier about the George Floyd protests and, of course, Black Lives Matter. And, I've seen support for Asian authors as a result of racism due to the pandemic. I've seen support of Muslim authors after the Muslim ban, Jewish authors anytime anti-Semitism is in the media. So I think we see a lot of support at critical times, and what we really need is that optimism and that sustaining momentum. So people need to care about supporting marginalized creators and marginalized folks working in publishing all the time, and not just when it's trendy, and not just when it's Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month or Yom Kippur. We need to care about these books year round, and these authors year round, and these publishing professionals year round. And it means a lot of difficult conversations. It means a lot of difficult inner work, like Caroline has mentioned. It means changing the systems from within, even when that's awkward and difficult and hard for people. And it means creating opportunities and access that just hasn't historically been there for a lot of people. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I really love working with WNDB, is because we do care about these issues year round, and everybody who's on our team cares about these issues year round. And that's something, in doing our communications, that's something I look at the blog, and in our newsletter, in our promotions, I'm constantly asking myself which voices we're not supporting as much as we could, and which voices are missing, and what nuances of the conversation need to be highlighted, and how can we make sure we're sustaining this momentum all the time. I don't want to ever be a part of that. I want to be a part of sustaining that hopeful optimism and creating change. And I think that's what we all need to do our part in, is making it a lasting effort and not just a temporary Band-Aid. I'm gonna read a book, about racism because something happened, or I'm gonna read a book by a Jewish author because something happened. It has to be constant and lifelong.
Terrific. That's probably a great place to end. But I do have another question. So there's a very positive statement. Let me just take one aspect of it. You said always looking to make sure that all the voices are represented. And I think there might be sometimes it feels like a zero-sum game, where if suddenly we're now looking at Black authors, then Indigenous authors are left aside. And so is there some inherent conflict, not be optimistic, but is that a struggle where certain different communities maybe feel left out?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Native representation has especially been lacking. For so long, the stories we've read about Native peoples have been through a pretty white lens. I mean, I know, at least growing up in Maryland, reading Little House on the Prairie and, you know, books like that, it didn't really capture and depict what Native peoples are truly like. I think that's, and we recently started an imprint, well, with HarperCollins, we're supporting a Native retreat, and we're supporting the editor of this imprint. It's called Heart Drum, and it's the first of its kind. And we're really excited. It's only going to be publishing Native titles. It is like, I think it's YA and maybe middle grade, and maybe it'll expand later on, but I can't wait to see the books that come out of there, and to have Native stories by Native writers is definitely something that's super needed right now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, good. Optimistic, and but there's still some, as Alaina said, there's still some areas to work at, and I'm fascinated how much I'm learning about what different groups and organizations are doing, and your organization is terrific. So thank you very much for joining us for this hour. It's been wonderful to get to know both of you. In 2 weeks, we're going to have another show. We're going to have the couple of lexicographers from dictionary.com. And so stay cool wherever you are. And thank you both, Alaina and Carolyn, for joining us today. It's been terrific.
Thank you for having us. It was great.
So much.
Great. Here we go. Thanks, everybody.